Good morning, everyone. My pleasure to welcome you to this meeting this morning of the revised Class 4 gambling policy for Council, and I'd just like to declare the meeting open and welcome everyone present, including those listening live streaming. So nau mai, haere mai, and we hope that it's an enjoyable day for everybody. First of all, I'd like to call for apologies. Now, I have some already listed. I have Councillor Raukawa-Tait, Councillor Gould, Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Sturt, Mr Berryman Camp and Mrs Morrison, and I have lateness from Councillor Bentley. So are there any more? I think that's probably all of them. May I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Thank you. Now, firstly, we'll move on to our staff reports, and that's on page 4, and we have a recommendation for the revised Class 4 gambling and board venue policy submission hearing. Now, I'd like to ask recommendation 1 is that the report Class 4 gambling and board venue policy be received. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Excellent. Now, today we're going to be hearing for submitters on this, and I'd just like to, we have a timetable of submitters here, and they all know, and thank you for those sitting waiting to come and speak to us. You do have 10 minutes. Now, that does include questions, so if you would like to have questions from the councillors and board members present, please leave enough time for that to happen. And please use the microphone. You'll find that there is a purple button in front of you and it will cut out if you stop speaking. So please, each time you engage to answer a question, please remember to turn that on again. And I'll just, because these are hearings today and we're not making a decision, the issue of conflict of interest, I'll just address that briefly, that many of the councillors are involved in a number of community groups. Many councillors, before they've come on council, are involved in community groups, which is why they stand for council, because of that interest. And so while there is no pecuniary and direct interest, we are mindful of those relationships we have with sporting and other bodies in the community. Thank you. Right, I'm going to now open the hearings, and our first submitter this morning is Mrs Jenny Nahu from the Bay of Plenty District Rugby League, and I understand, Jenny, you have a PowerPoint. If you'd like to come up and sit all the way over there, it does seem rather a long way away today. It's just we're missing a few bodies in action, so. And please have a seat, Jenny, or stand, whatever you're most comfortable with.
Good morning. Just before we start, I would just like to extend to our Mayor our deepest sympathy from the rugby league fraternity that I represent and the wider New Zealand as well. So to start off, yes, we do have a video, and it's of Puketawhero Park, which is our passion and which is what we have been endeavouring to develop as we've gone on. So to just show you all what we've done, we'll let you watch the video. Turn that.
Kia ora and welcome to Puketawhero Park, the home of Bay of Plenty District Rugby League, here in the beautiful Te Rotorua Nui a Kahumata Momoi. Our main field has fencing with the opportunity to include sponsorship and marketing for local and external businesses. Part of our new development is our multi-purpose conference room with a kitchen and full facilities including wheelchair access.
Fields number 1 and field number 2 have the latest in floodlighting for night games.
Adjoined to the conference room, we have 4 large changing rooms.
From here, the players have direct entry onto the number 1 field.
It's all that we can give you, and it's all that you can take.
Upstairs, we have our boardroom with tea and coffee making facilities.
Here in Rotorua, special feeling, special place.
We offer you the opportunity to inquire about the use of any of the facilities we have available.
From within the spring,
Our people, our game, our community.
the well-being of the people.
Thank you, Jenny.
Right, so that just gives you a bit of a view of what we've been doing and why we're so supportive of the funding that's available for us to apply for in developing facilities and resources of what we need. So there's floodlighting at the park. There's 3 fields now lit with the latest floodlights. These have all been achieved through what we refer to at times as the poker machine funding. And it's allowing us to have other users use the park, which was always our intention. So that video we've done now is enabling us to let other people see what we have got, and if it's available for their use, then we make it available. The more people that use the place, the better as far as we're concerned. So it's limited to different sports that can use it, obviously, but we're open to other users. And right now we're pretty chuffed because we've got the Māori All Blacks using our venue. So it suited them, and we're thrilled to have them out there training. So just in support mainly to NZCT, who's been a major funder for us, allowing us to do these projects that we've done to upgrade the park and the facilities. So that's about it. Any questions? We've still got other jobs we'd like to get done to complete the development. There's a car park that desperately needs a lot of work done on it. So we've still got projects to come, in other words, but so far that's what we've achieved. Yep.
Jenny, I'll open that for questions. Yes, Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you, Jenny. What a great facility that's coming along. You talk about the car park. Would that be something that you'd look to council to develop, or have you got a funding model where you go to every external funder, including the gaming trusts?
Well, the gaming trust is always on our radar because we've had success with them, but we would like to do it in partnership with the council because it is the council's ground after all. So if that's possible, certainly.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Jenny. Can you just give us, please, an idea of how many teams and age groups involved in the sport?
We start at under 6s and we end with men, so we go through every age group. We don't have a competition for 16s, we have 17s, and then we have 2 grades for men. So all those age groups.
And roughly how many would be involved in the code, do you think?
We're talking about Rotorua with you people in this area, so because we cover right down to Turangi Mangakino, so can't count them. And so in Rotorua we've got around just under 2,000.
Are there any other questions? Jenny, Councillor Kent, yes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jenny. Can you just give us some idea of what sort of percentage of your income actually comes from sort of the poker machine area? In terms of a percentage or something like that?
Probably 80%. It's high.
80%.
Yeah, most of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Actually, that was my question that Councillor Kent has asked was, what other funding bodies do you use?
We have had funding through the Lottery Grants Board as well for that major project.
Thank you. If there are no further questions from my colleagues, no. Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you for bringing a PowerPoint. It certainly does make a difference. The pictures certainly give us a very good idea of the development, and having seen some of that a few years ago, I'm delighted to see the completion of it. So we do appreciate that. So thank you very much.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Right, our next submitter is Mr. Jared True from the New Zealand Racing Board, and he also has a PowerPoint, so thank you. Welcome, Jared.
Yes, good morning. I'm Jared True. I represent the New Zealand Racing Board, the TAB. Here today to talk to you about your policy, which is of course both a gaming machine policy and a TAB policy. And the fact that those two policies are in the same document, they tend to get mixed up a little bit, which is something that I'm not a fan of, and I'll explain why. To start with, the New Zealand Racing Board opposes the proposed prohibition on new TAB board venues being established, and we support option 4, the status quo. So your current policy allows TAB board venues to be established in the CBD, which is, I believe, entirely appropriate. We are, however, looking at an opposite policy. We're looking at having a total prohibition on new TAB board venues being established. I ask, why the sudden change? What evidence, what's happened over the last 3 years which would justify a change from an open policy to a total ban? I've had a read of the social impact assessment and the resident survey, and I congratulate Council for commissioning those reports. They're extremely thorough. I've read the entire resident survey. I confess it must have taken me over 3 hours to read. And there was some very emotive language in that. But when I was going through and I was marking the number of times the word TAB mentioned, I think I could count it on one hand. Clearly the vast majority of concern related to gaming machines. And there's very little concern expressly related to race and sports betting. But here we are, after having received that report, looking from going from an open policy on TAB board venues to now banning them. And I believe that's unfair and unjustified. And I believe the proposed ban is based on concerns in relation to gaming machines rather than any actual concern in relation to TAB board venues. Race and sports betting is different than gaming machine gambling, and we ask the Council treat it on its own merits rather than having it impacted by concerns in relation to another form of gambling. We also believe that a prohibition on TAB board venues is in fact counterproductive on harm minimisation grounds. Under the legislation, Council's only got jurisdiction on TAB board venues. You don't have jurisdiction over our pub TABs, our hotel TABs, our club TABs or self-service terminals. And I'll go through and I'll explain the different type of TABs. The importance about TAB board venues are that they are one of the few venues that are alcohol-free. They're clean, modern venues with modest trading hours. In our submission, they're the safest environment in which race and sports betting can be conducted. And here you are looking to ban it. So this is what our TAB board venues look like. There's no alcohol, clean, modern. I visited your local TAB board venue this morning, a nice refurbished premise. I would have thought that that's actually a very, very positive venue to have in your city. So these are the type of venues you're looking at banning. If you ban them, and where there's market demand for race and sports betting, we're then forced to put TAB terminals in pubs and clubs. So you end up with TAB terminals in these types of environments, where there's alcohol served. And you also, if we ban TAB board venues, we end up with more self-service terminals. Again, we're able to put TAB terminals in pubs and clubs, and self-service terminals, wherever we like, without requiring council consent. The opposite also applies. If we were to set up a new TAB board venue, that that we need sufficient market demand to justify the staff, the lease cost, etc., etc. So if we were to set up a new TAB board venue, we would then tend to close 5 or 6 other TAB venues in the surrounding area to encourage people to come to the one TAB board venue. So the main thing as to why I think it's counterproductive to ban TAB board venues is that they're alcohol-free. The vast majority of them are alcohol-free. There's a reason why all the casinos around the world give away free alcohol. It's not because they're nice, it's because it's fantastic for business. After 2 or more alcoholic drinks, you're less likely to resist the urge to gamble. And once you've had sustained alcohol consumption, it results in unplanned, extended gambling and a riskier betting pattern. So your policy is looking to force the race and sports betting offering to be in an environment where there's alcohol, in pubs and clubs, as opposed to an alcohol-free environment. We believe that's counterproductive on harm minimisation grounds. The other major reason why I think it's counterproductive is that if we were to put a TAB terminal in a bar, a club or a hotel, that venue tends to open reasonably early in the morning and to be open to midnight or 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Our TAB board venues have very modest hours, opening mid-morning, closing 8, 9 o'clock at night. Race and sports betting must be treated on its own merits, and it doesn't need the same restrictions that game machine gambling may need. Out of all the problem gamblers that report to the treatment providers, they get asked, what's your vice, what's your concern? The vast majority of people, over 60% of people, say that their concern relates to the game machines. And that's just a cold hard fact. Only a small percentage of people say that their concern relates to race and sports betting. Only 8% say their problem is in relation to race betting, and 2.5% say their problem is in relation to sports betting. So it doesn't need the same restrictions. And we have plenty of councils around New Zealand that have a sinking lid in relation to game machines, but also then have an open policy in relation to TAB board venues, because they're different types of gambling. Sometimes I get a question, they say, well, Jared, if we were allowed to allow new TAB board venues, we know some of your TAB board venues have got game machines, and that will be a backdoor way to get more game machines in our city, and we don't want that. That can't happen. If we were to establish a brand new TAB board venue, and we wanted to have game machines there, we would need to get 2 consents under 2 pieces of legislation. We would need to get a consent from you to establish a TAB board venue, and then we would also need to get a separate consent from you to establish a game machine venue. So if your policy allowed TAB board venues, but had a sinking lid in relation to game machines, we could set up a new board venue, but we could not, without your consent, set up gaming in that establishment. So it's not a backdoor way to get more gaming machines. Separate consents, separate legislation, and importantly the Racing Act and the Gambling Act. The TAB board venue consents are granted under the Racing Act. Game machine consents are granted under the Gambling Act. 2 different acts, 2 different purposes. One of the major unintended consequences, if we stop the TAB setting up new TAB board venues, we stop the physical offering where you can go into a shop and put a bet on the America's Cup or the Warriors game or the All Blacks or the Lions tour. People then start looking at other forms of gambling. They simply migrate. And what we see is people migrating to internet and mobile-based offerings. And the problem is once they do that, they can then access offshore providers. Now those offshore providers don't provide any grants back to New Zealand, they don't provide any tax revenue to the government, there's no problem gambling levy contribution made to the treatment providers in New Zealand, there's no local employment created because there's no local venues, all bets are made on credit as opposed to going into a venue and betting in cash. It's highly accessible, you can lose your home without leaving it, you can bet in your bedroom, there's no bet size restriction, there's no staff monitoring and supervising and providing support to you. It's easily abused by minors. Rather than, little Johnny used to steal $20 out of mum's purse and go and spend it. Now little Johnny goes and grabs mum's credit card, writes down the numbers, puts the credit card back. Mum doesn't know until she gets her credit card bill the next week. Sees little Johnny's been betting online. No guaranteed return to player, it's all offshore. No guaranteed odds. And there's frequent use of inducements to gamble. In the physical environment, we've got trained staff. The New Zealand Racing Board staff are trained by the Problem Gambling Foundation. If someone's expressing signs of harmful gambling, we approach them, we check in with them, we ask them if they're okay, we talk about excluding them. In the offshore online environment, if you spend a whole lot of money and we haven't seen you for a while, there'll be a credit go into your account saying, you're a good customer, we miss you.
Mr. True, I'm just going to let you know you've got 1 minute left, so if you'd like to have a few questions, then you're running a little out of time.
Very good. Up to questions now.
Okay, excellent. Now, yes, Mayor Chadwick.
Just thank you for your submission. I think I heard you say that we shouldn't really be muddling up in
Right.
our revised Class 4 gambling board policy.
Yeah.
But isn't that an issue that you should take up with the Crown?
No, it's an issue I took up with you last time I was here. It's two pieces of legislation,
Yep.
and two policies are required. And your council has elected to put those two policies in one document for simply your own administrative ease, on the basis that there's a slight cost reduction in doing that, as it's only one consultation period.
To go out. And just a supplement to that, have you got plans as the racing board to have another TAB outlet in Rotorua?
No immediate plans to do that. Probably what's more likely in the event that our current lease comes to an end, or the landlord looks to increase the rent unacceptably, your policy would prevent the existing TAB board venue moving across the road. So we would like the ability to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just ask you, Mr. True, how many cities of similar size to Rotorua or sort of thereabouts have multiple TAB board venues?
A city of the size of Rotorua would typically have one, maybe two. Hamilton has three. So it would tend to be between one and three. So here we'd probably always have at least one, possibly two. I think we've had two here in the past.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jared, for your submission. My question is, Rotorua has been seen as one of the worst gambling in the country, and without restricting both, how can you say TAB board venues as positive gambling when we see gambling as just that, gambling? And what is your contribution to the community, please?
Good questions. Well, in relation to the proposed ban on TAB board venues, you're not going to stop people betting on the TAB. You're just going to have them betting in pubs and clubs where there's alcohol. And if they're betting in that environment and they've had a couple of beers, they're probably more likely to put another bet on rather than go home. So it's simply an unsafe environment. As far as what the New Zealand Racing Board's contribution is, as far as the funds that it generates, the New Zealand Racing Board supports the racing industry in New Zealand, which creates significant contribution to GDP. It's similar to the wine industry in New Zealand, creates significant employment and provides entertainment through the offering. Also, the funds that have come through the New Zealand Racing Board also has a gaming machine licence, and some of those funds are used to support the racing industry, and some is also used to support amateur sport.
I just have one final question. You mentioned that if you were to set up another venue, you would close those. Have you done that in any community in New Zealand?
Yeah.
And how many came out of pubs, hotels, sports bars?
It varies depending on how many there are and how many, this is the location, but it tends to be between 2 and 6 pub TABs will get closed. We're trying to encourage the spend to go to the TAB board and venue environment.
All right, okay. Well,
It just doesn't make sense to compete with yourself.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. True, for your very thorough presentation. I'm sorry we had to interrupt your PowerPoint. Thank you. Now, our next speaker is Mrs. Rhonda Cleland, the Health Improvement Advisor from Healthy Policies, and that's on page 8. Rhonda, thank you. Welcome. And Rhonda is representing Dr. Phil Shumack, the Medical Officer of Health.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. Phil does send his apologies. Rotorua is funded by the Ministry of Health. It's a public health unit for the Lakes District Health Board. Our purpose is to protect and improve the health of the population in lakes with a focus on reducing inequalities. For this reason, Rotorua supports the proposed policy of a sinking lid and no relocations. Gambling is a public health issue, and gambling machines are the most harmful cause of problem gambling. Much of the money spent on gambling in New Zealand comes from people who play gambling machines. Gambling harm can include economic loss, job loss, relationship breakdown, depression, suicide, and gambling-related crime. At-risk gambling is associated with higher levels of smoking in gamblers, hazardous alcohol consumption, other drug use, poorer self-rated health, as well as higher use of health and allied services. I noted that some submissions stated that 0.5% of New Zealand adults are problem gamblers. The Ministry of Health estimates the prevalence of problematic gambling to be 2.5%, and this figure includes current problem gamblers and moderate risk gamblers. Although the prevalence of problem gamblers may seem small, it is important to note that for each problem gambler there are ripple effects, with between 5 to 10 other people experiencing problems because of the problem gambler and their gambling. People affected by someone else's gambling may be family and whānau, friends, employers, colleagues, and the wider community. Gambling harm also extends to children. Children do not have a choice and have to live with the consequences of their parents' or caregivers' gambling, whether this be neglect, such as being left in a car, or whether it is living with the impacts of poverty and the impacts of arguments, anger and violence. And these all have ramifications for children's health, education and well-being. Gambling harm also exacerbates inequities within communities. Māori and Pacific peoples and people living in deprived areas are more likely to suffer gambling harm, whether this is a result of their own or someone else's gambling. The 2012 National Gambling Study estimated that close to 50% of problem gamblers are Māori or Pacific people. Rotorua acknowledges the benefit that community funding derived from the proceeds of gambling machines provides to community groups and organisations. We appreciate it is a difficult job to fundraise when there is limited capacity and few volunteers. However, the problem with this funding is that it comes from some of the most vulnerable people in our community, and they are the ones that are losing most to gambling. When we consider the social, economic and health effects of gambling and all those negatively impacted by the problem gambler, it is clear that the costs to Rotorua from gambling machines outweigh the benefits of community funding that come from gambling machines. I think the challenge is to find a win-win situation so that community organisations can continue to operate successfully, while at the same time access to gambling machines is decreased through a sinking lid policy. Maybe an idea that could be explored is a council-led service that provides assistance to community organisations with funding applications and information on funding streams that could be tapped into and which don't derive from gambling. An example of a council doing something similar to this is the Gold Coast in Australia, who run the Gold Coast Community Fund. This fund was established by Business Figures in 2000, and it raises money for distribution to charities and community organisations, while also helping organisations develop systematic approaches to fundraising. When Rothmans and other cigarette companies were forced to withdraw their sponsorship of events in 1995, there was concern about where funding would come from. However, funding has continued, but people have had to look in other places for it, and businesses have stepped up and have been able to help provide and fill the gap in many situations. It can be done. Rotorua supports a sinking lid and no relocation of gambling machines so that everyone in Rotorua is able to have the best opportunity for good health over their lifetime. Thank you. If you've got any questions.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you, Rhonda, and I think you've hit the nail on the head about the need to have funding for community amenities and how do we look for that. But how come there's such a variance between the harm from... There are many submitters that are saying there's only 0.05% of our population suffering with the harmful effects of gambling, and yet the Ministry of Health figures, which I would say are the expert figures, 2.5. Where's the variance come from, in expert opinion?
The variance is, they term 0.8% are problem gamblers, and then 1.7% are moderate risk gamblers, and they consider in the way of working it out that moderate risk and problem gamblers are the ones to be that are causing the issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, you heard the previous submitter. Would you agree with the contention that I see you say here at-risk gambling is associated with higher levels of blah blah plus hazardous alcohol consumption? Would you agree with the contention that alcohol consumption is a trigger for gambling, for more gambling?
It is certainly associated, and it seems that the evidence for that is what comes first, the chicken or the egg type thing. Are there issues beforehand, or does the gambling and losses also contribute to it? So it seems to be a both-way issue from what I understand.
A question on your idea of other funding streams, which is every community's issue. Where do you see the role of philanthropy? You talked about other businesses picking up. Have you got models of where philanthropy is working to address that gap?
The only thing that I can think off the top of my head at the moment locally is something like the Acorn Foundation that operates in Tauranga. This is something I have not spent much time considering, but I'm certainly happy to look into it and do some research on it for you.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Oh yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question to you. Rotorua being a Bay of Plenty wide service with the Lakes DHB, with Rotorua having almost double the amount of gambling machines on average to New Zealand, is this an issue that you're also finding in other communities around the Bay of Plenty, or for us in Rotorua, do you think that this is a very pressing issue for us to adopt this policy?
Thank you.
I certainly see it as a pressing issue currently with Rotorua, with, it's so much higher than the national average at present. I'm sorry, I can't talk with any great knowledge about what else is happening in Whakatane and Kawerau, but I do know that Kawerau has a policy that has been, that we've been very happy with, but I'm sorry, I can't comment any more than that.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This sort of relates to the previous submitter as well, where they were sort of drawing a distinction between TAB betting and pokey machine betting. Does the Ministry of Health have any particular opinion on whether gambling is gambling, or whether there is less harm from the racing industry style of betting as opposed to the pokey environment?
The evidence is certainly that gambling machines provide them are the most harm, and they are the ones that people most access. And they're the machines that have the most problem gambling associated with them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Rhonda. Very good. Thank you. Now, our next submitter is Mr. Mike Rogers, the CEO of Bay of Plenty Rugby Union. Thank you. Probably couldn't have been the worst day to have you in to come. We won't keep you very long.
That's all right. No. We enjoy being here.
So welcome, and please introduce both.
I will. Thanks very much. Before I introduce my colleague, am I allowed to stand up or do I have to sit down?
If you prefer to stand, that's fine. Just point the microphone, it moves. It's just that it is being recorded, and we do get a few complaints if our viewers can't actually hear what's happening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My responsibility is a big one in my eyes. I represent all of our stakeholders who participate in rugby in the Rotorua area. Now, if you look at your population, if I'm right, you're about 60,000 in the urban and 70,000 throughout Rotorua. If you look at the stakeholders that represent rugby, whether it's a player, a coach, a volunteer or a spectator, we make up about 10% of your population. So easily 6,000 people in Rotorua, if not more. We're going to have 28,000 involved on Saturday night participate in our sport. So it's a big part of your population. I'll just quickly, if I can just refer to the last submitter in terms of replacing revenue. I couldn't argue any more strongly against what that submitter said. I'm involved in the industry, as are a number of my colleagues across sport and events. Take away this source of revenue does not get replaced from any other source of revenue. I'll just reiterate that because I've been in this industry for 20 years. You reduce this revenue from sport, events, cultural events, whatever it may be that benefits this community. I've seen and I experience on a daily basis, you cannot replace this from commercial revenue sources. Our revenue drops year on year by about 20% from commercial revenue. Just think about that. Now, I want to do something slightly different because you look around the room, we're all a little bit older maybe. So I would like to introduce Kelly Homana, who is a representative of Bay of Plenty Rugby, and I just wanted him to share his story with you to give you a bit of a real taste of what this is about.
Kia ora everyone. Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for this opportunity. Oh, hey Craig. I've known him for a long time. Like you said, my name is Kelly Homana. I guess a bit about my story. I'm a born and raised Rotorua boy, but I guess all you see on the outside is a person who took his opportunities at rugby. But what a lot of people I guess don't know, and I had a discussion with Mike, is I guess my story. Growing up, I grew up in Full Block. I was one of those little problem kids. I was those kids roaming around at night time, jumping over your fence, taking your stuff. And I also was one of those kids that just got into a little bit of trouble. I did have a few visits from the police, but it wasn't until a bit of a kick up the bum from my grandparents and a move, I guess, I moved to my other grandmother's in Waka is where I sort of, I guess, shaped my act up. I was brought into rugby through my grandfathers, who I love most, dearest, and through rugby, I guess I was given the opportunity of a lifetime. 2007, 2008, I was fortunate enough to play for the Steamers. And in 2009, I was lucky enough to receive a contract to go play in Italy. So I guess 6 years later, or 3 years after that, I qualified for residency for Italy. And in 2014, I played my first test for Italy in another country against Samoa, which I hold dearly and I'm very proud of playing for that country. I went along to play another 11 tests for Italy as well as 2 Six Nations. I was unfortunate to miss the World Cup last year because of an injury, but last year I thought it was the right time to come home. And last year and this year, playing for the Steamers has been again another amazing opportunity. But for me personally, now it's time to give back to the rugby community. I've taken so much from it and I've learned so much while I've been away, and now I'd just like to do everything I can just to help Rotorua rugby and more importantly Rotorua kids achieve and know that just don't be stuck in a box. You are able to do anything if you put a bit of hard work in and you don't let, I guess, society tell you who you can or what you can't do.
Thank you, Kelly. It's an example of what we live on a daily basis through our sport. Now, our sport is not just about kids running around having fun. Our sport and all the other sports that you'll hopefully hear from through this process, we provide a really important outcome for our community, whether it's education, whether it's pathways, whether it's keeping kids out of trouble, whether it's dealing with obesity. 33% of our kids are obese. That's the statistics that are coming out. Those are the statistics that you need to think about when you're making your decision. What Kelly probably didn't highlight in terms of his story is he's now employed by Bay of Plenty Rugby to go into your schools, our community, to make a difference. He would not have that role without the support of gaming trusts. And I put my hand on heart and I swear to you, he would not have that role with us because we could not fund it. Without that support, he would not be making an impact in thousands and thousands of lives in the Rotorua community. Yep, problem gambling is an issue. It's equally well funded when you look at $18 million. Give me $18 million and see what I could do with it. Please consider the impact on the other side your decision will have on a large percentage of our community. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, and thank you, Kelly, for that enlightening story, which I'm sure we've all enjoyed hearing. Now, I'll open that for questions. Are there any questions for anyone around the table? Yes, Mayor Steve.
Thanks for coming and thanks, Kelly, for sharing your story. Why is this something that we depend on from the proceeds of gambling and not central government funding? If rugby is so important to the New Zealand psyche, which we all agree it is.
Well, I think it's, when you look at I don't know the ins and outs of a centralised model versus a regionalised model or the current model. It's not probably something for me to comment on, but I guess from our point of view, we prefer the current model because its decisions are made locally. And people can see what's happening locally and the good outcomes that have been that can be achieved locally. So I personally would not be in favour of a centralised model because I think that takes some of that understanding away from what is required in this community. Like I said before, you can't replace this funding from other sources, and we try on a daily basis. We're in the community trying to secure more support. But the money's just not there. And look, there's huge amount of causes. We're one good cause in our eyes, but there's so many others as well. That there's more than enough good causes in our community that need the support.
Mrs. Trumper.
Thanks, through you, Chair. I just have a question. How much funding do you get through the New Zealand Rugby Union?
Yep, that's a good question. So for community rugby, we get about $800,000 from the New Zealand Rugby Union. That's for the whole of the Bay of Plenty rugby region. So we have 11,000 players in Bay of Plenty rugby. And then on top of that, obviously when you add all of our volunteers and others involved in our sport, we're well in excess of 20,000 people involved in our sport. So you do the math of 800,000 across 20,000, it doesn't actually go that far, and that's why we need to supplement that revenue with others. Councillor Tapsell, did you take a photo before? Okay, was it of me or of Kelly? Probably of Kelly, eh? Oh, of both, okay, that's all right then. No, that's okay, I was just joking.
If it's a problem, let us know.
No, I thought it was of me, but it was probably of Kelly.
I just have one question, and you've got New Zealand Rugby funding, that's your 800K, and you've got the gaming funding that comes in. Are there any other funding sources, and what percentage would they make up?
Yeah, well, effectively, our revenue is a third, in real simple terms, across all of our rugby, because we've got two arms to our sort of organisation. You know, we focus on the community rugby arm here today, because that's what this source of funding is a major contributor to. Obviously, this source of funding can't be used for professional rugby, so we rely on this source for our community game. New Zealand Rugby then contributes to our professional game, as well as commercial revenue. So those are our real, and then gate, takings, etc. That's what contributes to more to the professional game. So we've got those three sources of income.
Thank you very much, Mike and Kelly, and thank you for coming and presenting. And we'll look forward to seeing you on Saturday, no doubt.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Along with a very full stadium.
I'll do the stadium and you do the weather.
Excellent.
Thank
We'll
you.
work on it. Thank you very much. Okay, our next submitter is Maylene Mariotti. Thank you. And that's on page 9. Thank you. And this is on behalf of Mary Thompson from Netball Rotorua.
Morena tātou, ngā mihi atu kia koutou, ko Maylene Mariotti toku ingoa, ko Te Aroa toku iwi, ko Ngāti Whakau e toku hapu no Ohini Motu ahau. Morena tātou. So, yes, as has been said, I'm here on behalf of Mary Thompson, who is our secretary from Netball Rotorua, and who's been on our association for 20 plus years and has gone on holiday to Vancouver. And she has sent me along, who I am one of the newest members on the association. I'm 3 years young compared to the others who are 15 years plus on the association. So I'm going to do my best that I can to talk about our submission that we've put forward this morning and hopefully answer your questions that you might have at the end. So our submission that Mary did put forward on behalf of Netball Rotorua was we are a sporting body and we rely hugely on the funding that's received from gaming trusts. For our young representative teams that we have, our Kuranaituku tournament that we run, and also our upgrade and maintenance of our facilities that we have down there. So we are just saying that without this funding from the gaming trusts, we would probably look to increase our fees, which would then make it non-affordable for players to play. So that's the submission that's gone through. Now, I want to take us back on a bit of a history trip. So, Netball Rotorua was formed back in the 1920s. And it was by Mr. Edward Guy and his wife Edna Guy. And we also had Mrs. Jean Lodge, who was our secretary and delegate back then. It was New Zealand Basketball Association, known back then before it turned into netball. She was also a player back in those days. We had 6 teams back in the 1920s, and we had 2 courts. And those courts were in the government gardens. Now, from there, they initiated our first Kuranaituku tournament, which started to grow and grow and grow, and that's where the move from the government gardens back in the 1950s, around there, moved to the Kuiro Park netball courts that's currently down there at the moment. And then by then, in 1992, they ran 4 successful Kuranaituku tournaments. But, and there was 8 courts and a small pavilion that was erected down there, which is, the pavilion's still there today, and there's no courts there, but because of the thermal activity that's happening, the court started to slowly disappear underwater. So they started to negotiate with council for a move to a bigger section. So around about 1992, negotiations started to 94, and then officially in 1995, they moved to the Westbrook courts, which is now there. And there's 20 courts there with a pavilion. So this is due to the Kuranaituku tournament growing and growing. So 2017 today, we're at our 84th year for the Kuranaituku tournament. And we have 3 weekends that we run this over, and in those 3 weekends there's 4 grades in each weekend. One of those weekends is a school grade, one is a competitive grade, and one is a social grade. So there's over 300 teams that participate, and you can imagine that's nearly, with 12 players in a team, nearly 4,000 players that are participating. That's from north to south in New Zealand, but also we have teams coming across from Australia to play. So not just locally, not just regionally, nationally, and then internationally as well. We wouldn't be able to run this tournament if it wasn't for access to our gaming trusts. So yes, we do apply to other trusts for funding, but 84 years of running this tournament wouldn't be successful as it is if it wasn't for us to have access to that funding. You can also imagine the amount of people, with the 4,000 being just players, the support group that come along with them, nearly half or just over half of that. And that contributing to the economy of our local business as well. So on the flip side, we're also helping to contribute and also benefiting from the funding that's given to us to run the tournament. Moving from that into our new pavilion area, we're now looking at upgrading those facilities. So the courts have been down there for nearly 20 years, and it's quite good that the courts have remained fairly well maintained and in good condition. However, with the Westbrook rugby fields just on the back there, and then there's sand flowing onto the courts, we're having to upgrade. So we're now currently in the process of resurfacing our courts with Rebound Ace and upgrading and maintaining the outside of the courts, because drainage and retaining walls and things all around have to be also upgraded. So this is looking at a 1.7 million cost, and councils, we're very appreciative of council coming on board. They're doing the civil works at the moment, covering some costs there. However, Netball Rotorua need to put forward funding and apply for access to Pūtea for that, cover some of that 1.7 million. So this is also where we support the funding coming through from gaming trusts so that we can upgrade these facilities. Now, this will definitely increase our participation if we're including these courts. We have 20 at the moment. With the upgrade of the courts, it will decrease down to 16 courts, because we have to align with Netball New Zealand's layout of courts, and we're doing the umpiring lines and things like that. So we're losing 4 of our courts. However, alongside the upgrade of the courts, we're also able to put in funding for upgrade of the floodlights. Now, when we upgrade these floodlights, the ones we currently have are training floodlights, we can then look to run games during the week. So if we're running games during the week under lights, we can then spread our competitions out over the week and the weekend, making it possible for whānau to spend time with their kids and their children's Saturday sports. So they may have little girls that play netball on Saturday, but they also have rugby players as well. So it's spreading that across the week. We currently run our ANZ Future Ferns Year 1 and 2, which is our little 5 and 6 year olds, on a Monday after school, and there is around about 21 teams that play on a Monday after school. So that's 210 players in itself, not including their whānau support, mum and dad, brothers and sisters running around the courts. So upgrading our facilities can then push our competitions over the week, which will then make everyone participate during the week, in the evenings, as well as on the weekends, which we're hoping will stop them from going to do other extracurricular activities, meaning gambling. So we're coming from the side of active participation, healthy lifestyles, and how we're tripling that effect into hopefully the home and the whānau as well. So with our resurfacing of the courts, we're hoping to have that all done by 2018. So looking to the 2019 season, and with funding, we don't need to increase the fees of the players as well. That will subsidise that we don't have to increase the fees, because as you know, our NSO body, which is Netball New Zealand, and then our regional body, which is Netball Waikato Bay of Plenty, they then set fees and increase it on their side, and then we have to increase it on our side through the NSO bodies. So going on from there, moving into our local normal Saturday morning netball, we have primary school grade, we have intermediate grade, collegiate grade, which is high school, year 9 and 10. Then we have our senior grades. So with our primary school grade, there's 7 grades with...
I'm going to let you know you've got 1 more minute.
Oh, okay, sorry. So jumping quickly, Saturday morning netball, we have roughly about 6,000 players over the grades, plus half of that is their support team, the mum, the dad, the whānau, so about 3,000. So 9,000 participating on a Saturday morning. And again, this is due to us having access to Gaming Trust funding so that we can run all these netball competitions on the Saturday. And we are all voluntary workers as well, but we have funding there to support other operations that we do. So just to finish off with a quote, you can take the lollies away from the kids, but they will always find a way to get more. So we are looking at give them something they enjoy with the sports, make it fit with the parents' schedules so that we can access funding to make fees more affordable, therefore increasing active participation and healthy lifestyles across Rotorua. Kia ora.
Thank you, Maylene. Thank you for wrapping up. Now, questions. Do we have, yes, Mayor Steve?
Just a quick question. Thanks, Maylene, and it is amazing the activity, similar to rugby, I see, with participants. But how much of your total funding is dependent on the trusts?
Probably around 80%, I'd say, because we get no income from Netball New Zealand as Bay of Plenty Rugby does.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Okay, there are no further questions. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Maylene.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to break, we've had one cancellation, we're now going to break for morning tea, and we will be back here at 10:40. So, there's plenty of food here for the submitters if you'd please like to help yourself to a cup of tea and anything to eat. Thank you.